The rain was soft that Tuesday afternoon, the kind that blurred the skyline of Portland into watercolor. My windshield wipers kept time with the hum of traffic as I pulled out of the hospital parking lot. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat just as I finished transferring $1,200 to cover my mother's cardiology bill. I thought it might be a thank you text, maybe even a photo from home. Instead, the screen lit up with 7 words that made my chest hollow out. "You're banned from Thanksgiving for not deserving this family." For a second, I thought it had to be a mistake, some cruel autocorrect error. But then another message came in from my cousin Ryan. "You made Mom cry. You're toxic. Stay home this year." I stared at the glowing letters until they blurred into the reflection of raindrops. My hands went cold on the steering wheel. The smell of coffee still lingered in the car, but it suddenly turned sour. I didn't cry. I didn't even curse. I just sat there as traffic crawled forward, realizing how easily a family could exile you with a single sentence. I had driven across town that morning to pick up my mother's medication, skipped lunch to send the payment, and texted her. "All set, Mom, don't worry." Not even an hour later, I became the family's outcast. A digital disownment. No explanation, no warning, just a decree. For a moment, I wondered if she'd hit send by accident. Maybe she meant it for someone else, but the second message killed that thought. "Dad and I talked. It's for the best." Those words landed like a slap. The kind of calm cruelty that doesn't need volume. I pulled over beneath an overpass, the sound of rain drumming against the roof. Cars hissed by in both directions. My reflection in the side mirror looked foreign, tired, blank, and oddly calm. I whispered "banned," as if saying it out loud might make it make sense. My family wasn't perfect, but they were mine. We argued, sure, but I was always the one who patched things up. The peacemaker. The one who sent the money, drove the extra miles, remembered the birthdays. And now I wasn't even worthy of a seat at their table. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinners we'd had before the long table, the noise, the way my mom always forgot the cranberry sauce until halfway through the meal. I used to love it, even when it was messy, even when Ryan made his usual jokes about me being misresponsible. I'd laugh it off. I thought keeping quiet made me strong, that staying calm made me kind. But sitting there with my phone glowing like a verdict, I realized something I'd never let myself think before. Silence isn't strength when it only protects people who hurt you. I tried calling my dad just once. It rang until it went to voicemail. No call back. Just the rain, the hum of traffic, and the echo of that text looping in my mind, "Not deserving this family." A horn blared behind me. I eased back into traffic, eyes dry but throat burning. Portland's skyline shimmered through the drizzle-gray buildings, gray sky, gray mood. My heart felt like it had gone numb. Somewhere in that numbness, something steady started forming. It wasn't anger yet. It was colder than that. Like the slow tightening of a wire that's been pulled too long. At a red light, I glanced down at my phone again. The bank app was still open. A notification blinked, "Transaction successful. Judith Carter medical payment $1,237. I stared at the confirmation for a long time, then whispered, "So I'm banned right after paying your bill." I didn't drive home right away. I parked in front of a grocery store and watched people carrying turkeys and pies to their cars. The kind of families who'd never imagine exiling one of their own over pride. I wondered what it must feel like to be loved, without conditions, to know that a mistake wouldn't erase your place at the table. When I finally reached my apartment, the lights felt too bright. I kicked off my shoes, hung my coat, and sank onto the couch. The air smelled like rain and old candles. I checked the family group chat out of habit. It was alive, pictures of pumpkin pies, messages about who was bringing wine, even Ryan posting memes about family drama. My name wasn't mentioned once. I typed, "Looks like fun. Did I miss my invite?" My hands trembled slightly as I hit send. Within seconds, my mother replied, "We just need things calm this year, Em. You understand." Then Ryan chimed in, "Try Christmas if you behave." A laughing emoji followed, as if humiliation could be softened by a joke. No one defended me, not even my father. I set the phone face down on the coffee table and leaned back, feeling my pulse in my throat. It wasn't just the rejection that hurt, it was how effortless it was for them. The ease of erasing me like deleting an email. I got up, went to the kitchen, and poured a glass of water I didn't drink. My reflection in the window looked steady, but something underneath had shifted. A quiet, irreversible click. I thought of every time I'd helped them without hesitation. The nights I stayed up managing their bills, the mornings I transferred money to cover someone's rent, the groceries I stocked in their fridge when things were tight. I never expected gratitude, but I did expect decency. Respect. A simple place at the table I'd helped pay for. Instead, I got a message that said I didn't deserve them. I sat back down on the couch and let the memory reel play: Mom laughing at Ryan's jokes about me being too uptight. Dad telling me to let things go for family's sake. Me always nodding, always fixing, always swallowing what hurt. Maybe they liked me quiet because silence is easy to control. The apartment was still except for the ticking clock. Outside, rain started again, soft and relentless. I whispered to no one. If they see me as the problem, maybe I've been solving the wrong ones. The thought startled me with how logical it sounded, like a financial equation finally balancing. For years, I'd been the family's unspoken safety net. The dependable one, the invisible one, the one who always said yes. But maybe the smartest thing I could ever do was say nothing and mean it. A text buzzed again. From my mother: let's talk after the holidays. Things will calm down. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. There was no explosion, no screaming, no tears. Just a long, deep exhale that felt like release. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and looked at my financial dashboard. Dozens of recurring payments glowed back at me: mortgage, utilities, phone plans, streaming services, all linked to their names. Every dollar a thread tying me to people who believed I didn't deserve them. The absurdity of it made me laugh, a sound that cracked the quiet like glass. Maybe I didn't deserve that family, I thought. Not the way they were now. Not if love meant obedience and sacrifice without acknowledgement. I closed the laptop, the room falling silent again, except for the patter of rain. My eyes landed on a sticky note above the desk, one I'd written months ago during a budgeting project. Track what you give. Notice what you lose. I smiled faintly. I was about to start noticing. Outside, a streetlight flickered, its reflection breaking into the puddles below. I watched it until my breathing evened out. Something in me had changed on that drive home. Something small but unstoppable. If they thought banning me from Thanksgiving would keep me quiet, they were wrong. It wouldn't be anger that answered them, it would be clarity. I whispered to the empty room, if they think I don't deserve this family, they're about to see what this family really deserves. The words hung in the air like a vow. The rain outside grew steady, rhythmic, almost approving. And for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like power. That night, as the city lights blurred into the rain outside my window, I told myself it couldn't get worse. But by morning, the silence from them would prove me wrong. The morning after the text, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping softly against my window. Portland had a way of matching your mood, gray and endless, when you needed it to be. The apartment felt heavier than usual, the kind of quiet that followed an emotional hangover. I made coffee strong and bitter, poured it into a chipped mug, and stood at the counter watching the steam rise. My phone buzzed with notifications from the family group chat: pictures of pies, links to recipes, Ryan's stupid jokes. No one noticed I hadn't replied. I scrolled through the messages until I saw Mom's comment under a picture of the turkey: family is everything. I stared at those 3 words for a long time. Family is everything. I used to believe that too. I used to think love was built through small acts, showing up, helping out, making things easier for the people you loved. That's what I did. That's what I was. 3 years ago, when Dad lost his job at the wood shop, they called me late one night. Mom was crying, Dad too quiet. The house payment was overdue and they didn't have enough to cover it. I didn't even think twice. I transferred $2,000 from the savings account I'd been building for my own place. Don't worry, I told them. Just get back on your feet. The next morning, Mom texted me, crisis averted. The bank gave us an extension. I smiled at the time, too tired to correct her. They believed the system had spared them. They never realized it was me. That was how it started. Quiet help, quiet gratitude, quiet erasure. A year later, when Sophie's phone got cut off during her finals, she called crying from a friend's number. I can't call the professor, Em, it's humiliating. I fixed it that same day. Let's just put everyone on one plan, I told Mom. It'll be easier to manage. And for 6 years, that bill came out of my account every month, $210 steady as clockwork. I told myself it was fine, that it kept everyone connected. I didn't realize it connected me to a pattern I couldn't see yet, the habit of saving everyone but myself. They used to laugh about it too. Emily's so organized, Mom would say, waving her hand like it was some harmless quirk. They never saw the weight of those automatic payments stacking up in the background of my life, disguised as responsibility. The truth was, I liked helping. It made me feel useful, grounded. It made me believe I was part of something worth protecting. But kindness in a family like mine wasn't a shared language, it was currency. Last Christmas, we all sat around the living room, the tree blinking in uneven rhythm. Ryan had just announced his promotion, another new opportunity he'd landed through a friend of Dad's. The room buzzed with pride. Mom turned to me. Em, how's work? I smiled. Same as always. Still saving money, she teased. Our sensible girl. Ryan chuckled, raising his glass. Yeah, Miss Budget Spreadsheet over here. You should loosen up, Em. Buy something fun for once. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, out of habit. I didn't mention that I'd just sent a payment to cover part of his credit card debt, the one he'd begged for help with, because it's killing my score. He promised to pay me back by spring. He never did. That night I lay awake thinking about how strange it was to be both needed and invisible at the same time. How they could love what I did for them, but not who I was. Then came Mom's heart scare last summer. A minor episode, the doctor said, but it felt major enough to them. I spent 3 nights in the hospital watching monitors beep, listening to the hum of machines. Caleb visited once, brought flowers. Ryan sent a text, hope she's okay. I'm slammed at work. When the bill came, Mom sighed, insurance will handle it. Insurance didn't. I did. $450 that month, quietly covered, no mention made. When the doctor asked who should be the emergency contact, Mom said my son Caleb. I stood next to her, the person who hadn't left her side, and smiled. It didn't even sting at the time. I told myself it didn't matter, that being reliable was enough. I thought of all those moments now as I sipped my coffee and watched the rain. Every transfer, every don't worry about it, every invisible rescue. It wasn't just generosity, it was a way of keeping myself tethered to them, proof that I belonged. My phone buzzed again. Sophie had sent a photo to the group chat, pumpkin pie fresh out of the oven. Ryan commented, looks amazing, don't burn it like last year. Mom replied with a heart emoji. Dad added, can't wait to dig in. No one noticed my silence. I scrolled back months, maybe years, through the thread. There I was in the background of every holiday plan, every family emergency. Em, can you grab the groceries? Em, can you drive Mom to the doctor? Em, can you cover it till next week? I'd been the invisible scaffolding holding up their comfort, and now that scaffolding had been declared unnecessary, disposable, I opened the drawer by the counter and pulled out my notebook, the one I used for budgeting. The pages were filled with tiny, neat handwriting. Mortgage, $2,000. Tuition, $3,200. Groceries, $150. Phone, $210. I ran my finger down the list. It read like a history of my love documented in dollars. My throat tightened. Every number had a memory attached. Every expense a small ache. I flipped to the last page and wrote Thanksgiving. None. It felt symbolic, final. The rain outside slowed. I could hear the faint sound of church bells in the distance. Somewhere people were planning their dinners, making grocery lists, counting blessings. I poured a second cup of coffee and stared at the steam curling upward. The family chat pinged again. Mom's so excited to have everyone home. Ryan, even Sophie's making it this year. I typed a reply, paused, and erased it. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like begging. Instead, I whispered to the empty room. Let them have their peace. I'll find mine. That afternoon, I went for a walk around the block. The air smelled like wet leaves and chimney smoke. Kids were drawing chalk turkeys on the sidewalk. It should have made me sad, but all I felt was numb. My phone buzzed again. A text from Dad. Don't make a scene this year. Your mom's been through enough. The words hit like deja vu. Don't make a scene. I'd been hearing that phrase my whole life. Every time I called out Ryan's lies or refused to take the blame for someone else's mistake, that's what they'd say. Keep the peace. Don't make a scene. Peace apparently meant silence. When I got home, I opened my fridge. Half a carton of milk, some leftovers, nothing festive. I didn't feel like cooking. I poured myself a glass of wine instead. The rain started again, heavier, now drumming against the window. The family chat pinged once more, a photo of all of them at Caleb's house, laughing arms around each other. Ryan held a glass of wine, Sophie made a silly face, Mom looked radiant. It was the perfect family picture. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. I wasn't in it. I could almost hear Ryan's voice. See, calm and happy this year. I set the phone down and laughed softly. Calm? I repeated the word, tasting bitter. The kind of calm that comes when the quietest person finally disappears. I closed my notebook, slid it back into the drawer, and exhaled. This time, my silence wasn't agreement. It was distance. It wasn't weakness. It was warning. Later that night, Mom texted me one more time. You know, Thanksgiving won't be the same without you. Then another bubble appeared a second later. But maybe it'll be more peaceful. I stared at the screen, smiled without humor, and whispered, Peace has a price. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop. The screen glowed with rows of transactions, the quiet history of my giving. Maybe it was time they learned what it cost. The rain outside turned steady again, tapping against the glass in rhythm with my heartbeat. I watched the city lights flicker in the puddles below and wrote one last line in my notebook before closing it for the night. Maybe it's time they pay theirs. That night, I went to bed telling myself the silence would fade by morning, but when the family group chat lit up the next evening, it only proved how easily they could celebrate without me. By Thursday evening, a week before Thanksgiving, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The group chat that had been quiet for days suddenly came alive, lighting up my screen with messages and emojis. I hadn't left the family chat mostly out of habit, but I rarely looked at it anymore. Tonight, though, the preview line caught my eye. Thanksgiving guest list reply. If you're coming, curiosity won over pride. I opened it. Names stacked neatly down the screen like a roster of belonging. Mom, Dad, Caleb, Sophie, Ryan and his girlfriend, Aunt Laura, and Uncle Greg. Even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. I scrolled slowly, waiting to see my name. It never came. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed deleted and typed again before finally sending, looks like fun. Did I miss my invite? The 3 dots appeared instantly. Mom replied first. We just have limited space this year, sweetie. You know how small Caleb's dining room is. Ryan followed a few seconds later. Try Christmas if you behave. A laughing emoji from Sophie. A heart from Dad. I set my phone down on the counter, staring at it as if it might apologize. Limited space. Behave. The words tangled together like barbed wire. It wasn't even about the dinner anymore. It was the tone, casual, dismissive, confident in its cruelty. The rain started again outside, faint and steady. I sat at the table, staring at the steam rising from my mug of tea. In the glow of the kitchen light, my reflection on the window looked composed, but something inside me was quietly fracturing. The next call came later that night. Dad. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hey, Em, he said, voice careful. Don't take all this too personally. Okay, your mom just wants a peaceful holiday. Ryan's been under a lot of stress lately. I bit back a laugh. So peace means pretending I don't exist. He sighed long and tired. You know how families are. Let's not make a scene. That phrase again. Don't make a scene. Peace at the cost of me. I stared at the dark window while he spoke, my reflection overlapping the faint city lights. Sure, Dad, I said finally. Peace. When the call ended, I felt that old familiar ache, the kind that used to make me cry quietly and move on. But this time the ache didn't melt into tears, it calcified into something else. I poured another cup of tea I didn't need, and sat down on the couch. My mind wandered back to all the Thanksgivings before. I could see them like scenes from a home movie, me standing at the counter mashing potatoes, while Ryan joked about how misorganized had probably made a spreadsheet for the meal, Sophie scrolling through her phone, Mom fussing over timing, Dad laughing in that way that said he wasn't really listening to anyone. Ryan would arrive late every year with a cheap bottle of wine and declare I brought the most important thing, the good vibes. Everyone would laugh. When he forgot to bring the rolls, Mom would wave it off. He's trying, she'd say. When I once forgot the cranberry sauce, the whole table teased me for weeks. I never understood why his mistakes were quirks and mine were flaws. But now, sitting in my quiet apartment with rain blurring the city outside, I finally did. It had never been about fairness. It was about convenience. I was the one who fixed things, absorbed things, made things work. Ryan was the one who made things fun. And fun apparently was more valuable than loyalty. The family chat pinged again. A photo appeared, Mom and Dad at Caleb's house setting up decorations. Testing the lighting for the big dinner, Mom captioned. Everyone reacted with heart emojis and exclamation points. Ryan added, can't wait, feels good to have everyone together again, everyone. I closed the app, turned off notifications, and sat in the dim light of my living room. The quiet felt sharp, not soft. An hour later, I got another text from Dad. We'll drop off leftovers if you want. I stared at it, unsure if it was pity or mockery. Maybe both. I didn't reply. I tried to distract myself with work emails, anything that wasn't family. But my mind kept circling back, replaying every moment I'd been told to be quiet, to understand, to sacrifice for the sake of peace. Peace that always benefited them. When I finally went to bed, I dreamed of sitting at the Thanksgiving table again. Except in the dream, no one could see me. I was right there, setting plates, refilling glasses. But every time I spoke, the sound came out as a whisper swallowed by laughter. I woke before dawn, my heart racing. The apartment was cold, and for a second I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered. I was in my own home. Alone, yes, but unseen, by choice this time. That morning I opened the blinds and let the gray light spill in. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining. My phone buzzed again, a text from Mom with a turkey emoji, and a caption, countdown begins. I deleted it. Later at work, my colleague Kara asked, so big family dinner next week? I smiled faintly. Not this year. I'm starting a new tradition. Oh, what kind one, where I don't have to earn my invitation. She blinked, unsure how to respond, then smiled carefully. That sounds peaceful. Yeah, I said, and for once I meant it differently. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the desk where my laptop waited. The screensaver flickered with faint light, casting shifting patterns on the wall. I opened the banking app again. My fingers hovered over the autopay tabs, mortgage, utilities, phone plan, each one tied directly to them. It felt like staring at a web I'd spun around myself without realizing it. Every thread a favor, every connection a small surrender. Ryan's voice echoed in my head from the chat, try Christmas if you behave. I almost laughed out loud. For years, I'd been the only reason Christmas even happened. The gifts, the dinner, the cleanup. I thought I was holding the family together. But maybe all I'd been doing was making it easier for them to hold me down. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady. I closed my laptop, walked to the window, and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The city lights blurred the world, smaller, quieter. For once, I didn't feel desperate to fix it. I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I just felt tired. Tired of being the reasonable one, the dependable one, the quiet one. My phone lit up once more. A message from Sophie Mom says, "Don't worry, there'll be leftovers." Leftovers. My share reduced to scraps. I stared at the message, then typed 3 words I'd never said to any of them before. Don't need them. I hit send before I could second guess it. For the first time, I felt something close to relief. Not victory. Not revenge, just a faint loosening in my chest, the feeling of air returning after being held too long. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and sat in silence. I didn't check my phone. I didn't open the family chat. I let the quiet stretch and settle, filling every corner of the room. Through the window, I watched a thin beam of sunlight break through the clouds. It hit the rim of my mug, scattering reflections across the table. Maybe I thought peace doesn't come from being included. Maybe it comes from realizing you don't have to keep earning a place that was never freely given. My phone buzzed once more, but I didn't look. For the first time in a long time, I didn't need to. That night I told myself I was done caring. But when Thanksgiving morning came and the world filled with warmth, I was no longer invited to. The silence felt colder than I expected. Thanksgiving morning arrived, wrapped in gray clouds and silence. Portland was hushed, as if the entire city had pressed pause. I woke to the faint hum of rain against the window, that soft percussion that used to make me feel safe. This time it sounded hollow. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and damp air. Normally I'd be up early roasting vegetables or packing containers to bring to Mom's house, but my kitchen counters were empty. The fridge held nothing festive, just milk, bread, and the leftover pasta I'd made 2 nights ago. I brewed coffee anyway, just to have something warm in my hands. The first sip was bitter. My phone, lying face down on the counter, remained dark. Not even a happy Thanksgiving from anyone. I thought maybe Dad would text, but he didn't. I stood there wrapped in my robe, watching steam curl from my mug and thinking how strange it was to be uninvited from your own family. Around 10, the church bells down the block started ringing. I imagined families filling kitchens, the smell of turkey laughter spilling from open doors. For a brief second, I wondered if I should drive over anyway, show up, make peace, pretend none of it happened. But then I remembered Ryan's message, "Try Christmas if you behave." I'd behaved my whole life, and look where that got me. Instead, I cleaned, I vacuumed, I rearranged bookshelves. I tried to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't spiral. The rain outside turned into drizzle. Through my window, I could see families carrying covered dishes, smiling, shouting greetings across driveways. A woman across the street balanced a pie on one hand and a toddler on the other. A man held the door for her, grinning. It was the kind of simple joy I used to believe we had too. At noon, my phone buzzed. I froze. The screen lit up with a message from Mom. "We saved you a plate. Porch pickup if you want it." That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just instructions like I was a stranger picking up a takeout order. Porch pickup. I read the text twice, then 3 times. The words blurred, the letters dissolving into a smear of disbelief. For a few minutes I stood perfectly still, waiting for another message, something kinder, something human. Nothing came. I put the phone down and walked to the window. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the world washed clean. The sky was a dull silver. I could almost smell the turkey from blocks away. My chest tightened, not from hunger, but from the realization that they truly didn't see the cruelty in what they'd done. By late afternoon, I couldn't sit still. The apartment felt too quiet, too suffocating. I told myself I wasn't going there for closure. I wasn't going for forgiveness or confrontation. I just needed to see it, to look that truth in the eye and finally stop pretending. I grabbed my coat keys and drove. The streets were almost empty, the wet pavement catching flashes of light from passing cars. I turned off the radio halfway through the drive when Home for the Holidays started playing. The silence inside the car felt cleaner. When I turned onto Maple Drive, my old neighborhood, everything looked the same but smaller. The trees were bare, the houses glowing with warm light from inside. I slowed as I approached the familiar blue house with the crooked mailbox. Cars filled the driveway and lined the street. I recognized most of them: Caleb's SUV, Ryan's truck, Sophie's little hybrid. My heart thudded once, heavy and dull. I parked a few houses away, just out of sight. The laughter carried faintly through the damp air. I could almost picture the table, Mom bustling Ryan, bragging about something, Dad carving the turkey while pretending not to notice the tension. Then I saw it. A foil-covered plate sitting neatly on the porch railing, catching the last light of the gray afternoon. The edges were curled, a fork taped beside it like an afterthought. For a second, I thought maybe someone would open the doorway, call my name. No one did. The curtain shifted once someone moving inside, but the door stayed closed. I stood there, half hidden by my car, watching my own family through a fogged window like a stranger peeking into someone else's life. A movement caught my eye. The neighbor's golden retriever trotted up the steps, nose twitching. It sniffed the foil, then pawed at the edge. The sound of crinkling aluminum echoed faintly in the cold air. The dog circled once and began licking at the corner, its tail wagging happily. Something inside me cracked, but not in the way I expected. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel rage. What I felt was a hollow kind of clarity. That plate wasn't for me. It never had been. It was a symbol, a performance. They'd left it there not out of care but out of convenience, so they could tell themselves they'd done the decent thing. We offered. That was their kind of mercy. I turned back toward my car, my breath fogging in the cold. I didn't take the plate. I didn't want a single crumb of their pity. The dog barked once as I opened the door, startled by the sound, then went back to sniffing the food. I whispered to no one, "You can have it, buddy. It's all yours." As I drove away, headlights from passing cars streaked across the windshield like quick flashes of lightning. My eyes stung, but still no tears came. I kept seeing that plate on the porch, the dog licking it clean, and the laughter behind the glass. It looped in my mind, absurd and perfect in its cruelty. By the time I reached my apartment, night had fallen. I parked in the dark, cut the engine, and sat there in silence. The hum of the city was distant. The world felt very small. I finally let out a long, trembling breath. The sadness was still there, but beneath it, something new was forming, something harder, colder, sharper. It was the feeling of a boundary solidifying. Inside, I hung my coat, kicked off my shoes, and turned on a single lamp. The warm light filled the room, steady and calm. I walked straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. Rows of payments glowed back at me. Mortgage, utilities, phone, streaming, medical. Each one a quiet promise I'd kept for years. My fingers hovered over the mouse. I didn't cancel anything yet, not tonight. But the idea pulsed through me like a live wire. They'd taught me that family meant obligation. That love was proven through sacrifice. That peace required silence. Tonight, standing in the glow of my screen, I finally understood the truth. Peace wasn't silence. It was freedom. I closed the laptop and looked out at the rain beginning again, fine and silver under the streetlights. Somewhere out there, my family was laughing full and content, convinced they'd put me in my place. They were right, in a way. They had. But they'd never imagined what I'd do once I stood up from it. I whispered into the quiet room, if I was the one paying for their comfort, it's time they learned the cost of losing it. The rain picked up, soft but steady, tapping against the glass like applause. And for the first time that night, I smiled. That night, I couldn't stop seeing that foil-covered plate in my mind, and by the time dawn crept through my window, I knew I had to face the truth written in numbers, the real cost of being their silence. The night after Thanksgiving, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of rain sliding down the window. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that foil-covered plate on the porch, the dog sniffing it, the laughter behind the window. I could still hear Ryan's voice echoing in my head, light and cruel. "Try Christmas if you behave." I got up around midnight, turned on the lamp, and sat at my desk. My laptop glowed in the dim light, the login screen waiting like a dare. I opened my banking app, scrolled through my transaction history, and felt something inside me go very still. Line after line, the evidence of my own quiet servitude stared back at me. Carter mortgage, Judith medical, Sophie tuition, Ryan gas money. The list went on for pages, each entry a quiet reminder of how much I had given, how much they had taken. I whispered to myself, every payment was a promise they never kept. My hands were trembling, not from anger, but from realization. I started downloading every statement I could find, credit cards, bank accounts, receipts from years of helping. Pages filled my desktop like ghosts of generosity. I opened the printer, fed it paper, and hit print all. The sound of the machine humming filled the silence, steady and mechanical. Sheets slid out one after another until the stack grew thick. I carried them to the kitchen table and spread them out. Under the yellow light, the pages looked like a crime scene, every number a clue. $2,000 for the mortgage, 3 separate transfers for the property tax Dad couldn't pay, $1,500 for Mom's medical bills, groceries, phone bills, car repairs. I'd been patching their lives together piece by piece while they laughed about my tight budgets. I started highlighting every payment that had their name attached. Yellow for my parents, pink for Sophie, blue for Ryan. When I was done, the pages looked like a map of misplaced loyalty. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my eyes. The total amount hit me like a physical blow, over $40,000 across the last few years. $40,000 that could have gone to my own house, my own dreams, my own peace. I wasn't their daughter, I said aloud, voice barely above a whisper. I was their direct deposit. The words hung in the air like smoke. I got up, went to the closet, and found an old brown leather binder I'd bought years ago for a trip that never happened. I placed the papers inside plastic sleeves, organizing them by category: mortgage and property, medical, utilities, Ryan's requests. On the cover, in thick black ink, I wrote "The Ledger of Lies." Each page I slipped in felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. For years I'd told myself I was helping because I loved them. But staring at those printed pages, I saw it differently. Love without respect isn't love, it's servitude. My phone buzzed on the counter. Ryan again. "Hey Em, quick favor, Jen's birthday's coming up. Can you spot me $600? I'll pay you back next month." I laughed out loud, a sharp, humorless sound that startled me. The timing was almost poetic. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I wanted the message right there, another entry in the ledger of their entitlement. As the night deepened, memories surfaced uninvited. The first time Mom asked for a small loan when the car broke down. The way Dad said, "You're the responsible one, Em, you understand." The way Ryan smiled and said family takes care of family whenever he needed cash. Every favor, every guilt trip, every "you're so good with money," all of it had built this silent prison I'd called love. I turned on the kettle, made tea, and sat down again. The air smelled faintly of paper and peppermint. I flipped through the binder, my eyes tracing every number, every date. My handwriting filled the margins: paid Mom's surgery, felt proud, covered Ryan's rent, felt stupid, paid Sophie's exam fee, felt invisible. Each note was a confession I hadn't realized I was writing until now. When the last page was filled, I closed the binder and ran my hand over the cover. The leather was warm under my palm. I whispered, "This isn't guilt anymore, it's evidence." I remembered something Margaret Evans, my old boss, once told me when I was too afraid to ask for a raise. If you don't value your own worth, others will discount it for you. Back then, I thought she meant work. Now I knew she'd been talking about life. I opened my email, typed her name in the search bar, and found her old contact, Margaret E., Financial Consulting. Without overthinking, I began writing. Hi, Margaret. I know it's been a while. I could use some advice about cutting old ties and starting new ones. Coffee this week. I hovered over the send button for a moment, then clicked. The clock read 3:14 a.m. I should have felt tired, but I didn't. My pulse was steady. My mind, for the first time in weeks, felt clear. I gathered the printed pages back into the binder, stacked them neatly, and placed it in the center of the table. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red, not from tears, but from exhaustion. Still, there was something new there, resolve. When I crawled into bed again, the rain had stopped. The city outside was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt like a held breath. I thought of the ledger sitting on the table waiting for morning light. It wasn't just paper, it was the shape of my awakening. They had called me the quiet one, the dependable one, the safe one. They'd mistaken restraint for weakness. But the truth was simple. I had learned their system better than they ever could. I knew every number, every bill, every password, every account. And I was done funding my own erasure. Before I drifted off, I whispered into the darkness, if they ever ask why, I'll show them the receipts. When sunlight finally filtered through the blinds a few hours later, I got up, made coffee, and sat back at the table. The binder was still there, solid and silent. I flipped it open to the first page and wrote across the top in bold letters, Next Liberation Day, December 2. I closed it gently, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. They taught me that love means rescuing, I murmured. But now I'll teach them that love has limits. The city outside began to stir, car doors, footsteps. The faint sound of birds breaking the quiet. I felt lighter, anchored by purpose. No more pity plates on porches. No more late-night transfers or quiet rescues. I was done being their safety net. I was ready to be my own. By the next morning, the binder was no longer just proof of what I'd lost. It was a plan waiting to be set in motion, and I knew exactly who I needed to call first. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and rain-soaked wool. I sat by the window, stirring a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. Outside, the Willamette River shimmered gray under the winter light. Margaret Evans arrived right on time, just as she always had back when she was my boss. Her scarf was crimson, her posture straight, her presence as grounded as ever. She spotted me, smiled, that knowing smile of hers, and walked over. It's been a while, she said, setting her umbrella aside. Too long, I replied, standing to hug her. Her embrace was firm, reassuring, like someone handing you a flashlight in a tunnel. When we sat down, she studied me for a moment before speaking. You look different. Less tired. More dangerous. I laughed softly. Maybe a bit of both. Margaret tilted her head, eyes narrowing. So, tell me what's brought you here, with that look, the one that says you've finally had enough. I reached into my bag and placed the binder on the table between us. Its edges were worn now, the letters on the spine slightly smudged from my fingertips, the ledger of lies. This, I said. This is what I've been carrying. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That looks serious. It's my family, I said simply. Every page is money I gave them, bills I paid, things I covered while they treated me like I didn't exist. $40,000 worth of quiet. She didn't interrupt, she just sipped her coffee and let me talk. I was banned from Thanksgiving, I continued. They said I didn't deserve the family, and then they left a plate for me on the porch. A foil-wrapped pity meal for the girl who paid their mortgage. Margaret set her cup down, her expression calm but sharp. And what did you do? I made that binder, I said. I've been keeping score for the first time in my life. There was silence between us for a moment. The clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation filled the air. Finally, Margaret leaned forward. You weren't foolish, Emily, she said. You were trained to believe that love means debt and duty. That family is an account you're supposed to fund without question. I exhaled, realizing how much I needed someone to say that out loud. So what do I do now? Keep proving them wrong, cut them off completely. She folded her hands. Neither. You perform a financial exorcism. I blinked. What a clean removal of every tie they've used to hold you. You can't reason with entitlement, Emily. You have to make it irrelevant. Her words sank in slow and heavy. So what? Cancel the bills, shut the accounts, and walk away. Not blindly, she said. Strategically. You built their comfort system, which means you know exactly how to dismantle it. Do it cleanly, legally, quietly. Let them face the emptiness they created. I looked at the binder again. It seemed to hum with a strange kind of energy, part evidence, part confession, part liberation, waiting to happen. They'll hate me, I murmured. Margaret smiled faintly. Hate is just louder, disrespect. You've already survived the quiet kind. I sat back, stunned by how simple she made it sound. She reached into her purse and pulled out a notepad. Let's make a list. Her handwriting was small and precise. As she spoke, I watched her pen move. Cancel autopay on mortgage. Transfer phone plan. Remove credit cards from shared accounts. Terminate secondary insurance. Cut off non-essential subscriptions. When she finished, she turned the notepad around so I could read it. There, your roadmap to freedom. I stared at the paper, feeling the faintest tremor in my hands. You make it sound so easy. It's not, she said. You'll question yourself every step of the way. Guilt will whisper. But you have to remember this: what you're doing isn't cruelty. It's correction. The word settled in my chest like a seed. Correction. What if they call cry beg? I asked quietly. They will, she said. And when they do, you tell them the truth, that adults pay their own bills and love isn't measured in transactions. Then hang up. I laughed under my breath. That sounds like you. It is me, she said with a grin. And soon it'll be you too. For the first time in months, I felt warmth that wasn't bitterness. Margaret didn't pity me. She respected me enough to tell me the truth. We spent another hour outlining steps, the kind of details. Only she would think of recording confirmation numbers, printing cancellation receipts, documenting every communication. It was like she was teaching me how to conduct a personal audit on my own soul. When we finished, I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. Sunlight glimmered faintly on the river, breaking through the clouds in thin beams. Margaret, I said softly, is it wrong to stop helping them, to let them struggle? She tilted her head, her eyes steady on mine. No, wrong was letting them use your kindness as currency. What you're doing now is giving them a lesson you paid for long ago. Her words landed with the weight of truth. I felt something in my chest unclench. When we stood to leave, she rested a hand on my shoulder. You know, she said, you've always been good with numbers. It's time you started balancing the emotional ones too. I smiled, surprised by how light my voice sounded. I will. As she walked away, I stayed by the window, watching her red scarf disappear into the crowd. The river gleamed brighter now, catching sunlight in sharp flashes. That evening, I went home with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. The binder sat on the passenger seat, its weight comforting rather than heavy. When I got inside, I placed it on the table and flipped it open. The first page stared back at me: mortgage assistance. I took out Margaret's notepad and placed it beside it. Then, on a blank page, I wrote in neat handwriting: Liberation Plan, Phase 1 Financial Exorcism. Underneath, I listed the steps: cancel autopay on property, separate phone plan, remove all cards, terminate shared insurance, document everything. When I finished, I sat back and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The sound of rain had returned, light and rhythmic tapping against the window like applause. I turned to the binder's last page and added a note in the corner: not revenge, redemption. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about balance. Before bed, I checked my email. There was already a reply from Margaret. Proud of you. Remember, boundaries aren't walls. They're doors that only open both ways when respect knocks. I smiled and closed my laptop. That night, sleep came easily for the first time in weeks. When morning light crept through the blinds, I woke feeling rested, almost renewed. I poured coffee, sat by the window, and flipped open my binder. Across the top of the first clean page, I wrote the date. December 2, Liberation Day. Below it, just one line. Today I start correcting the math of love. Outside, the city moved slowly under pale sun, the sound of rain replaced by the quiet hum of traffic. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the quiet one anymore. I felt like the calm before a necessary storm. That night, after finalizing every step with Margaret's notes beside me, I realized tomorrow wasn't just a date on my calendar, it was the day I would stop being their provider and start being my own witness. The night before December 2nd, my apartment looked like a crime scene made of paper. The binder lay open on the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of receipt statements and highlighters in every color. The air smelled faintly of ink and coffee. Outside Portland was quiet rain drizzling against the windows like a metronome keeping time for my thoughts. I stood there, barefoot, hair pulled into a messy knot, my sleeves rolled up. This wasn't grief anymore. It was focus. I took a deep breath, slid into the chair, and opened to the first tab, Mortgage and Property. The pages gleamed under the light, each one neatly labeled, the numbers highlighted in yellow. These weren't just transactions. They were the story of my silence. $2,000 for Dad's mortgage when he forgot to pay. $800 for property taxes. A water heater I bought last winter when Mom said, "We'll freeze if we wait another month." Now I stared at the totals the way the numbers formed a pattern of quiet exploitation. I whispered, "Never again," and began assembling everything into chronological order. By midnight, the binder was thick, heavy, and perfect. I flipped through it, slowly feeling the texture of each page under my fingertips. It wasn't sadness that filled me now. It was a strange kind of satisfaction. Every dollar was a memory. Every highlight a scar I could finally see. I paused, took a sip of cold coffee, and wrote on a clean sheet of paper, Liberation checklist. Mortgage autopay, cancel. Phone plan, transfer. Credit cards, remove. Shared subscriptions, terminate. Insurance, detach dependents. I looked at the list for a long moment, then said softly, "This isn't revenge, this is arithmetic." Around 2 a.m, I found myself staring at the spine of the binder. I picked up a black marker and wrote the title across it in slow, careful strokes, "This is what I did for you." Below it, smaller, "And this is what I won't do anymore." The ink bled slightly on the surface, but I didn't care. It looked permanent because it was. When I finally went to bed, I slept deeply, dreamlessly, the kind of sleep that comes when your decision has already been made. The morning arrived, gray and cold. I woke before my alarm, made strong coffee, and sat at the table with the binder beside me. For once, I didn't hesitate. I opened my laptop, logged into my accounts, and began printing final summaries for each section. The phone rang, once Ryan, probably calling for money, but I ignored it. His name flickered across the screen and disappeared. The silence that followed was cleaner than any apology. By 10, every document was in place. I opened the window, letting in the damp metallic air, and whispered to myself, "Liberation Day." As I worked, I thought about how long I'd been trained to be the quiet one, the good daughter, the reliable sibling, the safety net. I used to think that made me strong. Now I saw it for what it was, convenient weakness. When the binder was complete, I stood and looked around my apartment. The space felt lighter, like it was reflecting the calm I'd been starving for. I picked up the binder, closed it, and pressed my palm flat against its cover. "This," I said to the empty room, "is my proof of love and my proof of ending it." My phone buzzed again, a text from Mom. "Can you help with the internet bill? Ryan said his laptop won't connect." I almost laughed. The irony was too neat. Instead, I set the phone down, opened to the last section, Ryan's requests, and slid her text into a plastic sleeve. A fitting final exhibit. As the afternoon stretched on, I found myself lost in the rhythm of preparation. I labeled every divider with precision. Mortgage, medical, utilities, personal loans. Each one had its own color-coded tab, each one a chapter in the story of how they mistook my silence for endless supply. And yet, as I organized, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt control. Margaret's words from the cafe echoed in my mind. "You're not cutting them off. You're setting them free from the illusion that you'll always catch them." At sunset, I lit a single candle and placed it next to the binder. The glow made the plastic sleeves shimmer. I stared at it for a long time, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, peace without permission. I thought about every time I'd been called sensible, responsible, the strong one. Words meant as praise but used as chains. They loved my steadiness because it excused their chaos. Not anymore. My eyes fell on the handwritten line I'd added the night before December 2, Liberation Day. The clock read 7:42 p.m. I whispered, "Tomorrow morning." I poured a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and let the quiet sink in. Outside rain pattered against the window, steady and soft. I imagined my family at home, comfortable in their assumptions. Mom probably humming while folding laundry, Dad watching football, Ryan scrolling through his phone waiting for a miracle deposit. They had no idea the system was about to reset. I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted them to finally see what life looked like without me cushioning every fall. Before heading to bed, I wrote one last line at the end of my notes. "Love without accountability is just dependency dressed as devotion." I closed the binder and turned off the light. When morning came, I woke before the sun. The world outside was drenched in fog. I made coffee and dressed in simple black jeans and a gray sweater. No makeup, no armor, just intention. I slid the binder into my tote bag, grabbed my keys, and stood by the door for a moment, breathing. For a long time, I'd associated silence with weakness. Now it felt like strength, the kind of quiet before a decisive move. I whispered to the empty apartment, "Let's start cutting." As I stepped out, the city smelled like rain and renewal. Each footstep on the wet pavement felt like punctuation at the end of an old story. The day had begun, and with it the reckoning. When I woke the next morning, the sky was the same pale gray as the pages of my binder, and I knew before my first sip of coffee that today wasn't about planning anymore, it was about execution. December 2nd began like any other gray morning in Portland. Quiet mist curling through the streets, the air damp and sharp. But inside my apartment, everything felt different. The binder sat on the kitchen table like an altar, its title gleaming faintly under the soft light, "This is what I did for you." My coffee steamed beside it, untouched. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the pages I'd prepared, knowing this was the day I would finally cut every string. I took a deep breath and opened my laptop. The first item on my liberation checklist stared back at me, cancel mortgage autopay. My hands didn't shake as I logged into the portal. Years of transfers, quiet payments, forgotten gratitude, all visible in neat rows of numbers. Each one was a reminder of how many times I'd fixed something they'd broken. A customer service representative came on the line, cheerful and oblivious. "Good morning, this is Karen with Portland Savings Bank. How can I help you today?" I swallowed once. "I'd like to remove my account from an automatic payment. Property tax and supplemental mortgage assistance for account number 7321. "Of course," she said, typing quickly. "Can I ask the reason for cancellation?" I looked out the window at the wet skyline. "I'm not the homeowner," I said. And it's time they remembered that. There was a pause, the faint click of keys. "Understood," she replied politely. "You'll receive an email confirmation within the hour." When the call ended, I exhaled slowly. One tie cut. The confirmation email arrived moments later. I opened it, stared at the words, "Autopay terminated," and smiled. It was oddly beautiful, like the first raindrop before a cleansing storm. Next on the list, phone plan. I grabbed my coat and drove to the phone store downtown. The rain followed me, tapping on the windshield like a metronome marking each decision. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, too bright, too sterile. A young man at the counter greeted me with an easy smile. Hi, what can I do for you today? I need to transfer my line off a shared family plan, I said, and assign the remaining lines to a new account holder, Judith Carter. He began typing, glancing up with mild curiosity. Judith, your mom? Yes, I said evenly. She'll handle the payments from now on. He nodded, unaware of the weight in those words. Okay, we'll just need your signature to authorize the change. The next billing cycle will start under her name. He handed me the tablet. I signed my name, the stylus gliding across the screen like a blade through fog. The device beeped softly. You're all set, he said. Anything else I can help you with? I shook my head. No, you've helped more than you know. When I walked out, the air felt lighter. My phone buzzed once. New number, new account, new start. I stood under the awning, rain pattering on the pavement, and whispered, for the first time in 6 years, this phone is actually mine. Back home, I turned on my laptop again. Step 3. Remove cards from shared accounts. Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, Costco. Each one carried my name, my card, my quiet enabling. I logged in one by one, scrolling through purchase histories that read like a diary of dependence. Mom's vitamins, Dad's coffee, Ryan's protein powder, Sophie's beauty subscriptions. I removed my card from each. The screen flashed, payment method required. No, I said out loud, not anymore. I moved on to the next, and the next. The rhythm became almost meditative. Click, remove, confirm, delete. Hours passed without me noticing. The only sounds were the rain and the soft hum of my computer. When I reached the final entry, my mother's name listed as a secondary on my health insurance, I hesitated for the briefest second. The cursor blinked, waiting. My throat tightened, not from doubt but from memory. Her voice echoed faintly. You're so good with paperwork, Em. You always take care of things. I clicked remove dependent. The system asked, Are you sure? Yes, I whispered and pressed. Confirm. The screen refreshed. Her name disappeared. I leaned back in the chair, heart steady, pulse calm. For the first time in years, I felt like I was inhabiting my own life instead of financing someone else's. At noon, I closed the laptop and stared at the binder beside it. I added a sticky note to the last page. Total liberation achieved 12:04 p.m. The words looked strange, powerful. I made lunch, a sandwich and coffee reheated in the microwave, and sat at the window watching the city move. Somewhere in a house I used to call home, the phone would soon ring with unpaid bills. The streaming accounts would stop. The auto payments would fail. The safety net had vanished. By evening, my phone began to vibrate. The first text came from Ryan. Hey, what the hell, my phone's about to get shut off. Did you cancel the plan? I didn't answer. Then Mom M, the bank, called about the mortgage. Did you change something? It says we're responsible now. I set the phone face down. Dad's voicemail followed a few minutes later, his tone measured but tight. Honey, your mom's a little upset. Maybe you can fix whatever happened with the utilities. She's been trying to log in all morning. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the couch watching the lights of downtown flicker through the rain. Each message felt like an echo of an old life I'd finally outgrown. By the time the sun went down, the messages had turned to panic. Mom, the internet's down. Did you touch our accounts, Ryan? Don't be petty. You're making things worse. Sophie, Netflix says, payment failed. Did you do this? I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came not from joy but from closure. This isn't petty, I murmured. It's math. The calls came next. The phone rang and rang, each vibration a reminder of the noise I used to confuse with love. I let every call go to voicemail. By midnight, the silence returned. I turned off my phone and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, replaced by fog rolling across the streetlights. The world outside looked washed clean. In the reflection, I saw myself standing there, binder in hand, eyes steady. They called it chaos, I said softly. I call it consequence. The binder felt warm under my fingertips, as if it were alive with the weight of everything I'd finally reclaimed. Tomorrow they'd panic. The day after they'd rage, and soon after that they'd realize what it meant to live without my invisible labor. I wasn't afraid of their anger anymore. Anger was proof that they were finally feeling what I had for years lost. I whispered to the quiet room. They can hate me if they need to. At least, now they'll know what I was worth. I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the street outside. The binder rested on the table like a monument to balance restored. And in the silence that followed, I realized the sound of liberation wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was clean. It was mine. By the next morning, the first notifications started flooding in missed payments, failed logins, and unanswered calls, and that was when I knew the silence I'd created was finally being heard. By the third day, the silence had turned into noise. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, texts, missed calls, voicemails stacking like dominoes. I didn't need to check to know who they were from. The first came at dawn. Ryan, of course. And what the hell did you do? My phone's shutting off. Mom says the internet's down. Did you mess with the accounts? I stared at the message, sipping coffee, the steam curling into the cold air. I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, another text came in. Don't ignore me. This isn't funny. Then a third. You're being crazy. I turned the phone face down and kept eating breakfast. Toast, coffee, silence. I'd spent years fixing their chaos. Now I was finally watching them experience it firsthand. By noon, the panic had spread. Mom's name lit up the screen next. Her message was longer, dramatic as always. Emily, your father's blood pressure is through the roof. He's so stressed. The mortgage company called. The water bill came due. Why would you do this to us? We can't handle all this at once. A moment later, a second message appeared. You've always been our steady one. Please fix it before it ruins everything. I read it twice, then put the phone down. They were already rewriting the story, painting me as the villain in their own disaster. It would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. By late afternoon, the family group chat, the same one that had banned me from Thanksgiving, had become a war zone. Ryan. So Emily just decided to screw everyone over Mom. She must be going through something. Sophie, can we at least get the phone plan back, Dad? Let's keep things calm. No drama. Ryan. No drama. Half the house is offline because of her. I scrolled through the thread, watching them argue about my existence, as if I wasn't there to read it. I typed one message, actions have consequences. Then I deleted it. Silence said more. By evening the calls began. Dad first. His voice was tight, but rehearsed like a man who'd practiced sounding calm while panicking. Honey, it's Dad. Listen, I know you're upset, but this is too much. You can't just pull the rug out like this. Your mother's been crying all day. Be reasonable, okay? The voicemail ended with a sigh. The same sigh he'd used my whole life when he wanted me to fix things without him asking. Then came Ryan's call. No pretense, just fury. What the hell is wrong with you, Emily? You think you can play God because you make a few payments. You've ruined everything. Mom's crying, Dad's losing it, Sophie's pissed. Is that what you wanted? I listened until he ran out of breath, then hung up. The messages kept coming. You're so selfish. You've lost it. You need help. Family takes care of each other. I whispered to the empty room. Exactly. They finally can. That night, I didn't turn off my phone. I wanted to hear it ring. Every vibration, every buzz was proof that the weight had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix something. By the next morning, even the group chat had changed its name from Carter Crew to Family Emergency. I almost laughed. Mom, we need to talk in person. Ryan, she won't come. She loves drama too much. Sophie, maybe she's right to make a point. Ryan, oh please, she's enjoying this. For once someone tried to defend me, and it wasn't who I expected. Sophie's message stood out in the noise. She paid for everything for years. Maybe we should have seen this coming. The thread went silent after that. Around noon, I went for a walk. The air smelled like rain and smoke from nearby chimneys. The city was washed clean quiet in a way my life had never been. I passed a bakery couples holding coffee cups, a child tugging his mother's coat. Normal life going on without chaos. It felt good. When I came back, my voicemail icon blinked. 4 new messages. Dad's voice first, soft, tired. I don't know what to say. We didn't mean for things to get this far. Just call your mother, please. Then Mom, her voice trembling. You can't just abandon your family, Emily. What happened to my good girl? We did everything for you. Then Ryan again, louder, meaner. You're a monster. You think this makes you powerful. It makes you pathetic. I'm telling everyone what you did. I deleted all of them. That night I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window watching the fog settle over the streetlights. The calls kept coming until after midnight. Then suddenly they stopped. The silence that followed felt profound. In the quiet, I thought about the years I'd spent cushioning their mistakes. Every don't make a scene, every you're so good with money, every unspoken expectation. They'd built a system out of my compliance. Now without it, they were falling apart. I felt no joy in their chaos, just balance. The next day, the first sign of surrender came disguised as politeness. A text from Mom, Emily, I think we should talk. Please come over. Your father's worried sick. Let's fix this together. There it was again, let's fix this. I stared at the words, realizing how deeply they believed I existed to solve their lives. I replied simply, I'll come by tomorrow. Her response was instant. Thank you, sweetheart. We'll make tea. When I set the phone down, my reflection in the window caught my eye. I didn't look angry anymore. I looked prepared. That evening I opened the binder again. The pages felt heavier now, full of finality. I flipped to the last section, the one labeled Proof of Care. Each page told a story, every sacrifice, every forgotten thank you, every bill paid in silence. I ran my fingers down the neat columns of numbers and whispered, tomorrow I'll show them exactly what they built. Before bed, I checked the calendar. December 5th. It had been 3 days since I'd cut them off, 3 days since the world had turned upside down. I thought of Margaret's voice, calm and sure. They'll rage first, then they'll rationalize, then they'll reach out. Be ready for the third part. She was right, of course. They were reaching out. I closed the binder and set it beside my keys. The phone lit up again, Ryan, one last try. The message read, if you come tomorrow, don't embarrass Mom. Be decent for once. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Decent, I said aloud. If only he knew what that word actually means. Outside, the rain began again, steady and relentless. It sounded almost like applause. I turned off the light, sat on the edge of the bed, and breathed deeply. Tomorrow, the house I once called home would feel like a courtroom. And I was bringing all the evidence. The next afternoon, Mom's message arrived, short, brittle, and inevitable. Come over tomorrow. We need to talk. And just like that, the confrontation I'd been preparing for finally had a date. Sunday afternoon was gray and still when I turned onto Maple Drive. The familiar street looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of its comfort, its colors muted by the overcast sky. I parked across from the house I used to call home. The front lawn was wet leaves plastered to the concrete, and in the window I could see faint movement shadows passing through the kitchen. The binder sat in the passenger seat beside me, its cover worn smooth from my hands. This is what I did for you. I traced the letters once with my thumb before picking it up. It felt heavier than paper should, more like the weight of every unspoken thing I'd carried. When I stepped out, the cold air cut through my coat. Each footstep up the walkway echoed like a memory. I didn't knock. I opened the door and walked straight in the way I always used to. Mom was at the kitchen table. Dad beside her, his hands clasped, his expression unreadable. Ryan sat slouched in a chair, his phone on the table, face tight with defiance. Sophie wasn't there. The sound of the door closing behind me was sharp and final. Emily, Mom said first, her voice strained, almost rehearsed. We need to talk. I set the binder down on the table. The thud it made filled the silence. Dad frowned. What's that? This, I said, sliding into a chair, is the conversation. Ryan let out a short laugh, humorless. Seriously, you brought paperwork. Yes, I said evenly. Evidence, actually. Mom sighed. Emily, you're being dramatic again. We just want to understand why you'd do something so cruel. I met her eyes. Cruel? You mean canceling payments you never noticed? I made cutting ties you didn't think twice about exploiting. Watch your tone, Dad warned. No, I said softly. You've had my silence long enough. I opened the binder to the first section, turning it toward them. Mortgage assistance. I tapped the highlighted lines. 3 years ago, you called me panicked about losing the house. I wired $2,000 that night. You thanked the bank for giving you an extension. I flipped to another page. $800 for property tax the following spring. Another $1,000 the year after that. I didn't mention it because I thought family helped family. Mom blinked, lips tightening. We didn't ask you to. You didn't have to, I interrupted. You made sure I heard the panic in your voice and the guilt in mine. Dad's shoulders stiffened. He looked down at the paper, reading the numbers without a word. I turned another page. Medical and insurance. Here's the hospital bill from last summer, I said, sliding it toward Mom. I paid it the same day you called. You told me afterward that insurance covered it. It didn't. Her face paled. I didn't realize you didn't want to realize, Ryan scoffed, leaning back in his chair. Come on, Em. Are you really keeping score now? Families don't need ledgers? I met his gaze coldly. Families also don't need to mock someone after they pay your rent. He sat up straight, color rising in his face. That's different. I said I'd pay you back. You never did. I flipped to another tab and pushed it toward him. Here's your Venmo history. $600 for rent, $400 for your car, $300 for your girlfriend's birthday, oh, and a few dozen transfers for emergencies. He slammed his hand against the table. This is insane. You're acting like a banker. No, I said quietly. I'm acting like someone who finally stopped being one. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. Dad finally broke the silence. So what now? You want us to pay you back, is that it? I shook my head. No, I don't want money. I want acknowledgement. You told me I didn't deserve this family after I paid for the hospital that kept Mom alive. You left a plate for me on the porch like I was a stray dog. And you called that peace. Mom flinched, her eyes glassy. That wasn't what we meant. You just made things uncomfortable, I finished. By having boundaries. By refusing to be the one who keeps everything afloat while you laugh about how sensible I am. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I turned to Dad. You taught me that family sticks together no matter what. But somehow, that rule always started with me. He looked older, suddenly smaller. You could have just told us you were struggling. I stared at him, incredulous. Struggling? I wasn't struggling. I was drowning quietly while you built your comfort on my shoulders. Ryan stood up, pushing the chair back with a screech. You think you're some kind of martyr. You're not special, Emily. We all do things for family. Name one, I said. He froze, jaw tightening. I came home for Thanksgiving. I laughed short and bitter, and banned me from it. Dad's hand slammed against the table. Enough. His voice was sharp, his face flushed. This is tearing us apart. No, I said calmly. This is what's been under the surface all along. I'm just finally saying it out loud. I gathered the pages, flipped to the last section labeled Proof of Care, and slid it across the table. This is every payment, every sacrifice, every quiet rescue you turned into my identity. I don't expect you to understand, but I need you to see it. They didn't move. No one touched the papers. I stood. I'm done explaining myself. You can keep the binder if you want a reminder, or burn it if that's easier. Either way, my part in this story is over. Mom's voice cracked. Emily, please don't leave like this. We're family. I paused at the doorway. A family that treats silence as gratitude isn't family, it's dependency. Ryan scoffed again, his tone bitter. You think walking away makes you better than us? I turned my voice low but steady. No, it makes me free. The air felt thick. My father looked at me, and for the first time in years there was something like regret in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. I reached for the doorknob. Mom whispered behind me, "What are we supposed to do without you?" I didn't turn around. Live within your means. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound final and clean. Outside the air was cold and damp. The clouds hung low, heavy with rain. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing it in the sharp scent of winter and wood smoke. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for walking away. I felt steady, quiet, alive. As I reached the car, my phone buzzed. Ryan again. You can't just leave them like this. I typed a single reply, "I'm leaving you like adults." Then I turned the phone off. The engine hummed to life, the headlights cutting through the gray drizzle. As I pulled away, I saw a curtain twitch in the front window. Maybe it was Mom. Maybe it was no one. Either way, I didn't look back. By the time I hit the main road, the first drops of rain began to fall, light and cleansing. I rolled down the window, letting the air rush in. The storm had finally come, and for once I wasn't standing in its path. I was walking out of it. That night, as I drove away from Maple Drive with the rain blurring the road behind me, I didn't feel anger or triumph, just a deep, steady quiet that told me something had finally ended and something else was about to begin. 3 days passed before my phone lit up again. The house had gone quiet since the confrontation. No angry texts, no voicemails, no more late-night calls filled with accusations. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm has stripped everything bare. I thought it would feel like loss. Instead, it felt like breathing. I woke early that morning, sunlight slipping through the blinds, catching the corner of the binder I'd left on my kitchen shelf. It looked smaller now, ordinary, no longer an anchor but an artifact. I poured myself coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city move. Somewhere out there they were probably waking up too, facing the bills, the calls, the mess that used to quietly fall on my shoulders. I didn't check my phone until mid-morning. 3 missed calls from Dad, 1 new voicemail. I hesitated before pressing play. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual command. It's Dad. We're getting through it. Mom's been trying to sort things out with the bank. We're late on a few things, but we'll manage. Just wanted you to know we're okay. Or trying to be. There was a pause, and then softer. We didn't realize how much you were doing. I'm sorry for that. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was a crack in the wall, and for the first time that was enough. I deleted the message and sat there, hands wrapped around the mug, feeling warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the coffee. Later that afternoon, I walked along the Willamette River. The air smelled of rain and wet pine, the water reflecting the gray sky. Families passed by, parents pushing strollers, kids tossing breadcrumbs to ducks. It felt good to be invisible among them, just another person living her life, without anyone expecting her to fix theirs. When I got home, I found another message waiting. This one was from Mom. Your father and I talked. We went to the financial advisor your cousin recommended. We're cutting back, budgeting, doing the things you always told us to. We're sorry for not listening sooner. No guilt trip, no manipulation. Just a small human message that sounded like humility. For the first time in months, I smiled while reading something from her. That evening, I called Margaret. She picked up on the first ring. Well, she said, her voice warm. Judging by the tone of your silence lately, I'd say something's shifted. It has, I said, sinking into the couch. They're trying. I don't know if it's forgiveness or just exhaustion, but it feels different. Different is progress, she said. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it's just release. I looked toward the binder on the shelf. Then I think I'm finally there, she laughed softly. Good. You sound lighter. I feel lighter. When the call ended, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. For months, every financial spreadsheet had been filled with obligations, mortgage payments, utilities, their names, their problems. Now the columns were blank, waiting for something new. I titled the first page, My Life Budget. Under expenses, I wrote rent, groceries, travel savings. Under goals, I wrote freedom, peace, boundaries. The words looked simple, almost childish, but they carried a weight that felt solid and true. The next morning, I stopped by a small real estate office near the river. The same office I'd walked past 100 times before, always thinking someday. Inside, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair greeted me. "Looking for a place?" "Not yet," I said. "But soon," she smiled. Good. People who say soon are the ones who actually do it. We talked for a while about condos near the waterfront, small spaces with good light. I didn't sign anything that day, but I left with a brochure tucked under my arm and a strange sense of momentum. That evening, the city lights reflected off the water like strings of gold. I stood on my balcony watching the river, feeling the wind against my face. The phone buzzed again, Ryan this time. I didn't answer, but I read the message. "Mom says things are getting better. She's actually cooking again. Guess you made your point." I almost deleted it, but something in his words caught me. Not the mockery, he'd never outgrow that, but the acknowledgement hidden beneath it. "You made your point." Yes, I thought. I did. That night I dreamed I was back in the house on Maple Drive, but it was empty. No laughter, no shouting, no guilt. Just light streaming through the windows, and me walking through each room, turning off the lights one by one, before locking the door and walking away. When I woke, I felt peaceful. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail, handwritten, not typed. Mom's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. "Emily," it read, "we saw the binder again. Your father keeps it on the table, says it reminds him to pay attention. I know we hurt you. I can't take that back, but I hope someday we can start over, not like before, but better. I made your favorite pie this week. I didn't leave it on the porch. I ate it myself, but I thought of you." I laughed quietly, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even enough. But it was honest. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the back of the binder under the tab labeled Proof of Care. Then I closed it for good. That night, I invited 2 friends from work over for dinner. We ordered takeout, drank too much wine, and talked about everything except family. For the first time, I realized that the word home didn't have to mean blood. It could mean laughter that didn't ask for repayment. After they left, I cleaned up the dishes, humming under my breath. The apartment smelled of garlic and rain. I looked around the small, bright space and whispered, "This is enough." Before bed, I wrote one last note in my journal. Peace doesn't come when they apologize. It comes when you stop waiting for them to. The next morning, I stuck a yellow post-it to the fridge. In thick black letters, I wrote, "No is a complete sentence." It made me smile. It felt like closure and a promise all at once. Outside, the sun was rising over the water, painting the sky in soft gold. I poured coffee, opened the window, and let the cool air fill the room. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for a call, a crisis, or a request. I wasn't someone's safety net. I wasn't anyone's quiet savior. I was just me, and that, I realized, was the truest kind of peace. That night, as I turned off the lights and looked around my quiet apartment, I realized peace wasn't something I had to wait for anymore. It was already here, and by the next Thanksgiving, I would finally know what it felt like to wake up free. A year later, Thanksgiving morning began with sunlight. No rain, no gray sky, no ache in my chest. Just the golden light streaming through my apartment window, warming the wooden floor. The lavender I had planted on the balcony swayed gently in the breeze, and for the first time, the day didn't feel like a test. It felt like mine. I brewed coffee and watched the steam curl upward. On the kitchen counter sat a small white envelope with a neat return address, my parents'. I'd found it in the mail slot the night before and left it unopened, unsure if I wanted to let their words in. but something about the quiet morning made me brave enough. I slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the card inside. The handwriting was careful, a little shaky. Happy Thanksgiving, M. No plates on porches this time. Just gratitude. I smiled, feeling a warmth that wasn't nostalgia but understanding. People can change when you stop protecting them from the consequences of staying the same. The coffee finished brewing. I poured a cup, opened the window, and let the cool air in. Somewhere down the street I could smell cinnamon and roasted nuts from the bakery. A year ago, those smells would have made me ache with loneliness. Now they just reminded me that peace can have its own flavor, quiet, simple, real. My phone buzzed once. A text from Mom. Dinner's small this year. No crowd, no drama. Just us if you want to come. I stared at it for a long time. There was no guilt, no begging, no manipulation, just a quiet invitation. I typed back, maybe next year. I'm making my own dinner tonight. Her reply came fast. That sounds nice. Send pictures. It was strange how easy the conversation felt, as if all the heavy things between us had burned away and left only what could survive the fire. I set the phone aside and turned toward the shelf above my desk. The binder still sat there, its brown leather cover faded from time. I hadn't opened it in months. I took it down and ran my fingers along the spine. The title had rubbed off a little, but I could still read the faint words. This is what I did for you. When I opened it, the first few pages were still filled with receipts, invoices, bank transfers, a museum of the old me. But halfway through, I'd replaced the rest with blank pages. At the very back, there was one new section labeled in my handwriting, plans. Inside were printed notes for the life I'd started building, savings goals, investment ideas, travel lists, a sketch of the condo I wanted to buy by the river. Every number on those pages was mine, every line my choice. I closed the binder and whispered, lesson complete. After breakfast, I went for a walk downtown. The city was alive with quiet joy, children holding paper cups of cocoa, couples carrying pies, laughter spilling from open doors. I passed a florist arranging winter roses and stopped to buy a single stem. The woman wrapped it carefully in brown paper. Someone special, she asked. Yes, I said. Me. On the walk home, I thought about Margaret, about how she'd once told me that boundaries weren't walls but doors that only opened when respect knocked. She'd been right. The silence I built hadn't been revenge, it had been space for something new to grow. Back home, I placed the rose in a glass bottle on my windowsill. The light caught it perfectly, its shadow stretching long across the counter. I began preparing my dinner, just roast chicken, vegetables, a slice of pie from the bakery. Nothing extravagant, but everything enough. As the food baked, the smell filled the apartment, wrapping around me like warmth. I turned on music, soft piano, the kind my mother used to hum while cooking. For a brief moment, I imagined her doing the same thing miles away. Maybe she was humming too. Maybe we were both at peace in different kitchens, finally breathing without expectation. When the timer beeped, I sat at the table, one plate, one glass, one quiet celebration. I didn't feel alone. I felt whole. After dinner, I stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was fading into pink and gold. The air was cold but gentle. Across the street, a family laughed as they carried leftovers into their car. I watched them go, smiling. Not with envy but gratitude. Peace, I realize, doesn't erase the past, it reframes it. The pain becomes the proof of how far you've come. Inside, my phone buzzed again, this time from Ryan. Hey Em, we got the hang of paying bills now. Guess you rubbed off on us. Happy Thanksgiving. I stared at the message and typed back, Happy Thanksgiving, Ryan. That was all it needed to be. Later, as night settled in, I opened my laptop and created a new document. The cursor blinked against the white screen like a heartbeat. I typed, no is a complete sentence. Then beneath it, and yes should only be spoken when it doesn't cost your peace. I saved it, closed the laptop, and leaned back, feeling the kind of quiet that's earned, not given. From my window, I could see the reflection of the city lights on the river, the same water that had once mirrored my loneliness, now glimmering with calm. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let gratitude wash over me, not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd finally found. When I opened my eyes again, I whispered, "I'm free." And I meant it. I thought about all the people out there, still stuck in the cycle I'd lived through, the ones who keep giving, hoping love will balance the scales, the ones who confuse silence with strength. If I could reach through the screen right now and tell them something, I'd say this: you don't have to keep proving your worth to people who measure it in what you give. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose peace over obligation. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud or cruel, it's living well after the noise stops. Have you ever been the one holding everyone else together until you broke? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story because maybe someone needs to hear it too. And if this story felt familiar, if you've ever found power in finally saying no, stay with us. There are more stories of silence turning into strength, of justice whispered instead of shouted. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your truth. Because sometimes healing starts the moment you stop explaining and start living.